Hi, it's Jess. We're currently hard at work making season 2, which will appear on video and is going to release in December, if not sooner. You can help it be sooner by joining our Patreon. Your $5 goes directly to pay an editor and a mixer to take that labor off my plate and bring them out sooner. But in the meantime, we're going to be dropping all kinds of delightful goodies. In fact, recently, I had the incredible opportunity to appear on the Dungeoncast podcast. I got to talk to the hosts, Will and Brian, about what it takes to make a D&D podcast. It might be more than you think. So if that's a topic that interests you, listen on and look out for more drops during the summer.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Dungeoncast. I'm Brian.
And I'm William.
This is the podcast where we talk about everything tabletop role-playing games.
And today we have the honor of being joined by Jess Parks from the podcast I Seduce The Dragon.
Pleasure to be here.
1, 2, 3, 4. Shout out to you,
Welcome, adventurers, to the Dungeoncast.
Hey Jess, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on. So you're Jess Parks, the DM, and a multitude of other things for the I Seduce The Dragon podcast. I have your credentials that you wrote on your website up here. You're a sound professional. You worked on several high-key movies. You're a first-time DM. You like spending time making the podcast, but doing movie and sound design. So you're all over the place with the sound stuff. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it's my main gig. I work in sound for feature film. I am a sound mixer. I am a sound editor. And the correlation is pretty obvious between the two. I find, though, that I have drawn a lot of my experiences from being involved in the filmmaking process into producing a D&D podcast.
Yeah, there are definitely some overlaps there, and I can relate. I studied some film for a while and wanted to do sound design for a long time. I found a happy place to call home in the podcasting world for actual plays, so I can totally see how those skills can and would apply to what you're doing. So that's a great asset to have for your podcast and your squad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's the key for me. If I didn't have those skills, we probably wouldn't be here.
Dang. So what inspired you to go into the actual play podcast business?
So there's one thing that I knew before I went into it, and that's that making a D&D actual play podcast is an incredible amount of work.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It involves putting yourself out there for strangers to judge.
True.
Very true.
You know?
Yeah.
And honestly, we had a home game already, and not every home game translates that well into a podcast. All these things I knew, so I actually didn't want to do it at first.
Oh, okay.
But I had actually kind of been practicing to do it for a few months by the time we had the conversation. You of course, remember the upset that the strikes and the pandemic caused for the industry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And about that time is also when I myself got into Dungeons and Dragons for the first time as a lifetime hater. I hate to admit it, but a lot of people of my generation grew up kind of deciding for no real reason that D&D was lame. And I lived with that for a really long time. And this has been the lesson of my life, that everything that I most dislike for no reason at all, I actually probably really love. And so, in Stranger Things, I'm just going a little weird history here, a little tangent, but like when Stranger Things popularized Dungeons and Dragons, right? I was surprised. that was a fact, that it was popular. It was like, that doesn't make any sense. And my husband was like, yeah, no, it's huge. I'm like, what? He said, yeah, these games, they go for like 10 years. And I'm like, 10 years?
If you're lucky, 10 years.
If you're lucky, 10 years. So he said, yeah, sometimes people cry when their characters die. And I'm like, are you kidding me? adult people
Absolutely.
shed tears over their imaginary character in their pretend world. And
Absolutely.
he's like, yeah, that is the truth, and that absolutely happens. So it's almost the not making sense of it that got me intrigued. Like, how could that possibly be true? And then I started a game, and I made my first character, and it's this elf princess wizard for my first character.
Yeah.
I chose the most homeworky character possible.
It's a tough one.
And we played that character for a couple of years, and then she died.
Ooh. First character death. Oh no.
Everyone cried. Everyone cried, and I was shocked at the emotional impact of that moment. I got to work the next day, and I opened my laptop, and her character sheet was up, and I felt real grief.
Dang.
You know,
Yeah.
like, you guys clearly know that feeling. You know that feeling. It's magic.
Yeah, it mostly happens to other people, not so much to me, for whatever
Oh,
reason.
you're so good at D&D.
Yeah, because I'm the best, obviously. No, it's just sometimes the dice say you die, and it happens.
Sometimes the dice say you die,
Yeah.
and sometimes the dice say you live.
Yeah. They haven't come for
It
me
was
yet.
just so powerful. Yeah. So that's kind of like why I got into it at all. So when it came time to like make this game and I'm playing it, I'm enjoying it so much. And then comes this discovery that your game, trying to tell people about your game is a little bit like telling them about your dream. It
Yeah.
just doesn't, they weren't there.
It's true.
I don't get it. And you sound a little insane. So then came the challenge of, how does this work? There were D&D podcasts I listened to that I enjoyed, and I was trying to figure out, why do I enjoy those? But if I listen to the recording of my own game, I, zone out. I can't focus. And I started trying to figure that out. And because I had all of this free time, I began recording my games with the girls, our Frost Maiden campaign, and cutting down. I wanted to see how quickly I could tell the story. So I started cutting way down to make a little recap that was less than 10 minutes long, but still told the story, and not like a snippet type of recap, an actual narrative. A leads to B leads to C, joke leads to D, end. So I did that just as like a personal challenge and a gift to them. And those got better and longer. And finally, I ended up doing an hour-long one. And that's kind of when everybody was like, should we make this a podcast?
Yeah. There you go.
And, and at that point, you have all these doubts, right? I don't know if you relate to this, Brian, but a big one for me was like this certainty that nobody would want it.
Yeah, there's definitely a threshold there that, like you said at the beginning, you got to put yourself out there. Got to trust your creativity. You as a creative person, you took the plunge, and it seems to be working out, right?
It is. So far, it really is. It's been really gratifying to find the people that have found our podcast so far. We have this, modest but growing, really earned audience of just awesome fans that make me feel heartened by that. And I'm not even looking necessarily for like a large number of people. I'm like a quality over quantity kind of person.
Sure.
This thing that I make for the podcast is kind of made for me, kind of made for the player that I was when I first started, when I found Critical Role to be a little bit too high of a barrier to entry.
Yeah, that's a
as a
tough one.
newbie.
High bar.
Yeah, yeah. So I sort of was like, what would baby D&D Jess enjoy? What would suck her in more? And I find, as is the case with everything we do, movies, TV, Dungeons and Dragons, the best Dungeons and Dragons podcasts, are all centered around the relationships and the chemistry.
It's true. Yeah, you found it.
Yeah. And that's what we had. I mean, that is what we had. And as much as I thought, nobody really wants this, it's going to be so much work, I'll never be able to keep a schedule, there's challenges I don't even know exist yet. The truth was that I loved it so much, I was doing it for free. So
Cool.
Maybe I should try to make a job out of it, which has yet to be seen. But It's pretty damn cool. I really, really am enjoying the experience of living the game and then crafting it into something, into a presentation, to an experience after the fact that someone who wasn't even there can get sucked into.
Yeah, when you have that chemistry at the table, you're going to hear people having fun through the microphone, and that's super critical and important. And when you have the post-production resume that you do, I know that you're turning it into something fantastic. Let's jump behind the screen, the DM screen, for a little bit, because I know you're using Icewind Dale. You guys are running Rime of the Frost Maiden as the base for your adventure. Why Rime of the Frost Maiden? I know it's a popular adventure. Did something stick out to you that made you want to run that?
I wish I could say yes. I think I got very, very lucky because it actually is an excellent adventure for a first-time long campaign DM.
I've definitely heard that.
For a number of reasons.
Yeah.
The only reason that I was doing it, so here's the thing, like when you're running a game and you've got these players and you're really trying to figure out what they want, so that you can give it to them without asking them, right? Like it's that thing where, a good boyfriend or a good husband will kind of like listen all through the year what kind of stuff you want for Christmas,
there
and then pick it up, and come Christmas time, how did you remember I love those shoes? They're just listening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly doing that. And so the Rime of the Frost Maiden was actually a gift. After we assembled the group, I told them I would go looking for something to play, and it was Dana, actually, who pulled out this giant map and was like, can we play this? And to hear her tell it, she says that she chose it because she wanted me to run a longer campaign than I was planning to run. So in order to do that, she had to pick something that would appeal to me, which is horror.
Cool.
And I think it was the newest adventure out at the time. So between the newness, the shiny newness, and the dark grittiness of it, it definitely appealed to me. But the thing that appealed to me most was that she handed me a gift of what exactly she wanted to play.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that shiny blue cover doesn't hurt either. I know that thing popped off to me on the shelf for sure.
Man, I have 2 versions of that book. Wait, do you have this other one? Do you have this variant?
Oh, the alternate art? I know what you're going to pull out right now, and I do have it. It's very
gorgeous.
pretty.
It's one of the better looking variants.
Oh,
yeah. That's the one
Look
right
how
there.
beautiful that is.
That's one of my favorite 5th edition alt covers for sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's great.
We drew a lot of inspiration from this artist for our logo.
Oh,
actually.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like
I
the
can actually
logo a
kinda
lot.
see it. I'm looking
The
at your
dragon
logo
with the
now.
sword through the mouth. Yeah.
Thank you.
Super cool. Okay, well, so now you're in Rime of the Frost Maiden. So how have things panned out in terms of like sticking to the module? Do you have to deviate from it, go off beaten path? And has that made things easier for you or harder for you depending on how the results came out?
Well, so you guys have clearly read this module.
I'm aware of what goes on in it more or less, but I haven't
I'm probably
played it.
a little more familiar, but I have not played it, but I've read through a good portion of it.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, you know that it starts with starting quests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like two little, 0 hardness quests. I did not connect personally with those quests, so they were gone. We jumped in to a different point in the book, but the characters from the quests did end up coming back and then having larger roles because the characters ended up really loving them.
Right.
So, now this Torga Ice Vein, who's the side character in the starting quest, the Ice Vein something quest, is like one of my players' long distance kind of like lover.
Oh, wow.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
There's a whole episode that's just a date, an improvised date between the 2 of them. But I could use her then as this vehicle to lore drop.
Oh, yeah.
So it works out great. It's a beautiful creative puzzle trying to tell your story, but follow your players on their meandering path.
Yeah, it is a tightrope sometimes.
Yeah, it is. I think that in terms of like what, with the module itself, the great thing about the Frost Maiden module is that there's kind of like 3 big plot points, like 3 main goals.
Yeah, okay.
And then a lot of different encounters that all are sort of interwoven with clues or things that lead toward those goals.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, the goals themselves are expendable. So do you have to kill the Frost Maiden in this campaign to successfully navigate it and get a lot out of it, including a satisfying conclusion? No.
Yeah.
You do not have to beat her. Do you have to explore the Dwergar Fortress? I'm going to say Dwergar because Baldur's Gate 3 made me do it, but the whole season 1, we're calling them Duergar, and my one character even calls them Beauregard.
Oh. It happens.
So, you don't have to do that either. So it's very forgiving for what your players decide to or not to do. I think probably one of the biggest changes for us in our campaign is the Lonelywood quest, which is sort of a low-level quest about killing a moose. It was totally hijacked because my player submitted a backstory that had took her from Lonelywood, and it just sort of changed the landscape of what Lonelywood needed to be and how it fit into the 10 towns. So once again, instead of a small side town where something not so big happens, containing no clues to the main quest, like you'll look online and you'll find breakdowns of the different 10 towns and which ones are most relevant to hit to do the different larger goals. Lonelywood's not a big one. It's more of an XP sort of developing place, and it became really central to ours. In fact, the entire season 1 finale is centered around Lonelywood and what's going on there, which for me, as a DM, it just gets me really fired up. I've heard one of you, Brian, maybe say that you feel like some of the best creativity happens in a box, that you need boundaries.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, it's a.
Oh, did I credit it? Should it have been Will? Did I credit the wrong person?
we both talk about it. We both
It's a
agree on the
pop.
point.
Yeah, it's a popular take. So
Yeah.
it is good. Yeah, once you're in a box, definitely agreed.
Give you something to break. DMs like to break the rules too. So
Oh, yeah.
give us some rules to break and make ours. And that's a lot of what I've been doing in this campaign. But I feel that that's very common. I actually feel like that's almost how the adventure is meant to be run. They give you so many gifts and so many ways to rearrange it that making it yours is very easy.
Yeah, I find that it's one of my favorite questions to ask anybody who runs a module is like, okay, are you sticking to it? Like, when did you abandon it? Because almost everybody I talk to that runs modules has at some point, the skeleton's still there, but they're doing their own thing, kind of like how you're talking about right now. Oh, we turn this into this, and now this piece has to turn into this so it can accommodate us. And I always think that's so interesting. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are, making it work and taking it off the rails, so to speak, and doing what you got to do to make it a campaign.
But on your show, FBATS, may I ask you a question about that?
Oh yeah, sure. I love talking about FBATS.
Because you obviously went in with a plan that was all yours.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't breaking a module. Did your players then make you rearrange that, or did you just know them so well that they pretty much more or less followed the trajectory that you had mapped out for them?
Yeah, it almost always worked out. Just because I knew exactly who was going to be sitting at my table. Just for anybody listening that's not aware of what FBATS is, it's called Flashbang and the Surgeon. And it's based off of Batman the Animated Series episodes. So essentially the idea was to take the script of an episode of Batman the Animated Series and turn it into a module of sorts and use those plot points and basically run players through a fantasy version of Gotham City. And just because me and my two buddies, Steve and Jake, that are on that show, we had a lot of chemistry growing up together. And, so the jokes flow and the creativity I knew would be there. The main thing was, like, I know that these guys, these episodes might not be fresh in their mind, but they know how Batman acts. So they kind of know that, like, the expectation is to try to do what Batman would do. And they didn't have to do that, but it was encouraged. And they usually did. Like 90% of the episodes they panned out. But the ones that didn't were really very special in that way, that you're breaking the mold, and now I'm laying down fresh tracks, trying to keep the campaign to the end of the episode. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see if we can meet up with the bad guy at the end and how that's going to look. Particularly with, I think I remember Bane kind of giving me the runaround somewhere in the middle of the episode. It's like, okay, we're supposed to end up at the docks. I gotta get us back to the docks. He's in a boat. I don't know what to do. I guess he could just show up wherever. But yeah, that was FBATS was a ton of fun. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's you can hear it. You can definitely hear the quality of the chemistry that you've got going on there. It's a really, really great listen. For any of your fans who haven't heard it yet, it's a great listen.
Yeah, go check
It's coming
out
from someone who
FBATS.
doesn't like D&D podcasts. So.
Yeah, we did what you did, which was what would we like to hear, just as us, and try to be ourselves. And hopefully it works out. And if it doesn't, that's fine. And we ended up getting a lot of there's a lot of people that are now close to me in my life that because they like FBATS. Like,
wow.
Yeah, we've a few of us have like bonded over it. And like, you really liked it that much? That's awesome. Like, we should be friends, because people that like FBATS, they're probably people that could be my friends.
Because it's so much of you in it.
Yeah, it's definitely, there you go. You hitting the nail on the head for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk more about Seduce the Dragon. And I want to know about your players. How do you guys all know each other? What I know you said you were playing a home game before. What brought all that on, and how do you know them? You guys are obviously friends, sounds like, so.
Yeah, well, actually, our player Ryan Keeley was a new acquaintance of mine. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party.
Oh.
And she is just, if you know anything about Ryan Keeley, you're probably not telling your friends. But I met her at a dinner party, and she turned out to be just one of the coolest people out there. And we got into this conversation about nerd hobbies, in particular Magic the Gathering, which is a passion of hers.
Oh, cool.
And is also a passion of my husband's, and I know how to play. At least I can hold my own.
Hey.
The cards are just getting so complicated these days.
And it's a Wizards of the Coast product, so they're kind of running side by side with D&D. So
Sure.
Most people know they know one and the other. They're hand holders.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we're talking, and I'm like, yeah, I've been playing D&D. She's like, I love D&D. I'd love to play a game. And I'm like, well, I've been thinking of maybe running a game.
Hey.
Which is not true.
Gotta make it happen.
I just wanted to I had been considering, I'd been dipping my toe. I had been running like a one shot for people who didn't even know, like Grant Howitt one shots for my family,
cool.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just the easiest to most accessible storytelling practice kind of things. But the idea of diving into a Dungeons and Dragons campaign was not yet where I thought I was ready to go. Mm-hmm. But I was just so delighted by meeting Ryan, and she was already friends with Flanders, who plays Martha. And so here I've got two people, and I'm assembling a group of people that not for a podcast, a group of people that I intend to, that I hope that they'll become friends. So I have a good skill for building a great team, just in general, professionally as well. But when it comes to knowing which friends will get along, I've got tons of friends who I've introduced and they go and hang out without me, and that's makes me feel great. But but it's you can tell when people are going to get along, and so I had these two personalities, and I wanted to sort of fill in what we needed to make not only successful friendships, but a successful game. And so I invited Christina, who is, she is so good at D&D. She is she's ruthless because she's so good in the way that, like, when you're an expert, you can do dangerous stuff and still, like, pull back at the last minute.
I see.
She is very, very good. She stopped outsmarting me halfway through before we started the podcast. After a few months, for a while she would do these things where she'd be like, so is this thing here? And is there a person like this over there? And I'd be like, yes. What are you getting at? What do you want? Uh-huh. The answer is going to be yes. And she was like, okay, I've played with a contrary, what's the word I'm looking for, dungeon master before, that I had that would say no a lot or would try to thwart her a lot. So she learned to sneak up on them. But I'm not that guy.
I see.
So So she's just very brilliant and very funny. She's so smart, which goes great with Ryan. Ryan's smart as hell too. She whips out facts off the dome, non sequiturs that are just so delightful and true. It's lovely to see the two of them spin off. And then Dana, who is just saucy, I guess I would say. We needed a little sauce.
Sure.
She's just so sweet and enthusiastic, and she brings so much heart. And what I accidentally received was 4 players who all want something kind of different from our game, which is thrilling for me to then be able to figure out how to deliver that. And that actually has turned out surprisingly to be a really good combination, because not all of them want a deep backstory to be plunged and, brought to the surface and huge character relationships, but some of them do. Mm-hmm. So I can spend all of my story craft, all of my drama, melodrama energy on, a couple, and then, this other one just wants to be famous and hit stuff. So I just throw assassins at her at every corner.
Cool. That's awesome.
It's just easy. So it ended up being a perfect dynamic group of people. I think in retrospect, if I were trying to make an actual for a podcast, I might have tried to find people who had more different sounding voices.
That can be a
that's
challenge.
One comment. Yeah, that we've got a couple of players that sound kind of similar, but I don't think I would trade that for the chemistry. I think, keep listening, you'll get it.
There you go. Yeah, that has happened to me in the past where I'm listening to the podcast. I'm like, I was listening to the Adventure Zone, which was like one of the first major podcasts probthey that happened.
Those boys sound all the same.
Exactly. Yep. The McElroy brothers. After years, I was like, okay, I know which one is which but they all sound really similar. I was wondering about that. If you try to address that in the mix at all.
I do.
That's good.
I do. I pan them.
Yeah.
I pan them. I know who sounds. I know who sounds similar, and so I take those voices and I put them furthest left and right. So I'm center. You've got the very different sounding voices, a little bit left and right, and the more similar sounding voices furthest apart. And I've had some feedback that has been a helpful technique.
Yeah, I've looked into that. That does seem to be the solve. So yeah, good on you for sure.
Yeah.
So you've got a great group. You're checking a lot of boxes for me about being a great DM, listening to your players and trying to accommodate everybody. So that's solid stuff. Improving when necessary. Have your players? I know you've kind of said that they've taken things into their own hands at times. But let me frame the question like this: What out of the unforeseen challenges that have arisen in the story in terms of deviations, what are the standouts? Which ones have kind of jumped out at you the most?
Well, I can't for the life of me get them interested in going to the Dwargar Fortress. Just cannot. What are some other deviations? What else? Oh, obviously the complete hijacking of the Lonelywood story.
Right. Completely
hijacked. The complete changing of Torga's role and everything. There is, I shouldn't even say this, but I will. I shouldn't say this.
It's up to you. I won't hold it against you. I don't need you to spoiling your stuff if you don't want to.
It's not spoiling. It's one of those things where the players they think they changed something that they didn't actually change.
Yes.
And I don't want to spoil that mystique for them, so maybe I'll skip over that one.
I think you've said more than you need to already.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think I get what you mean, and so
yeah,
our
okay.
audience probably will too. Well, what kind of special considerations were made when you're curating like your campaign for an audience? Was the module just kind of like cookie cutter ready to go? You're ready to put that on microphone? Or are you making snippets and edits here to kind of bring it to an audience? I know you said at the beginning that you were making like kind of small recap sessions for your players. Is that something that you sort of kept with your module?
Yeah. For the audience, the biggest thing that I do for them is edit, and we edit heavily.
Cool.
There's a couple of things that happen in filmmaking that I find come into the podcasting production quite a lot. And one is that moment on set when the chemistry's cracking and something happens on camera, the actors deliver a scene, or maybe there's a blooper or something that is just so funny. Everybody's rolling. It's all that the camera crew can do not to laugh out loud. They yell cut and everyone bursts into laughter and they can't wait to see it in the cutting room. And then the editor gets this scene and they're just like, this is not that funny. Like, why?
That's rough.
You like, it's like a weird heartbreak.
Moment.
The ultimate had to be there. And there's a lot of that in D&D.
Oh.
Because it's such a chemistry driven activity, I find that I go into the cut and now I'm putting on a totally different set of eyes. I'm trying to see it as the person who wasn't there. And there are things that I thought were hilarious, but they're a little too inside, or they're a little, anything that's going to make the audience feel like maybe they aren't sitting with us, maybe they did miss something. I'm going to get rid of that. And the other thing that happens is that, especially when you're making a comedy movie, is that your incredible comedian is going to riff, right? They're going to riff with the material. They're going to try different deliveries. They're going to do different things. It's not all going to be gold. So that's what your editor does, is they take all that material, they go through, they find the best joke, they fix the timing, and it works. And I do that as well for our players. So when I go through an edit, I'm not just wholesale lifting out stuff that doesn't matter. I am adjusting comedic timing, dramatic timing. I'm making sure nobody's talking all over each other, as we record online. So it's really hard to know when you can start speaking without interrupting someone.
Right.
And I make everyone sound really good at D&D, because that's something I actually don't enjoy listening to. Is a lot of, sometimes it's entertaining and sometimes it's informative, but generally just not remembering a rule and trying to figure it out unless it's entertaining or particularly funny. Generally, I'm also cutting that stuff out. So everyone's just like quick with their decisions, quick with whatever, because the game is a vehicle. The game's the vehicle for the connection. Just like the game itself, the meta game of playing D&D is a vehicle for having friends. It's not about the game and it's not about the rules. So I do try to minimize the actual rules. And, look, for people who are trying to, I wish I could play along, we actually, we make a separate version of the first few episodes. We plan to actually do them all. We call them Clippies version.
Okay.
Because Christina, our experienced player, before the podcast, had this habit of hopping in with like, "Oh, I see you're trying to cast a spell. Do you want some help?"
That's awesome.
So we made a version that's like a pop-up video kind of thing, where we pop in with little information about actually what's going on in the game mechanic wise, but it's snarky and it's funny and it's quick. So I've had some very positive feedback as well. But the non-players, which is most of the people in my civilian life, appreciate that we make the Clippy episodes so that they aren't totally lost.
That's awesome. I love the clever name. I was like, does she mean like the paperclip from Microsoft?
Yes, I do.
Well, that's really, really awesome. I love the approach. We understand with the approach to our actual play stuff, not necessarily FBATs, because that was like a private Patreon show to start, but with our Super Quest Saga show, we did that approach too. Like, we're making essentially a radio show, more radio approach than movie show, but I don't hear that many differences. Try to leave the chemistry on the table without being too inside jokey. Those are all great considerations to make. Mm-hmm. So that kind of bled into my next question, which was, what types of things do you consider in pre-production? Well, I guess not. So I guess I'll just ask you, what types of things do you consider in pre-production in order to create your finished product that you envision for your audience? Like, are you thinking music, sound effects, voiceover work? Are you going back to do that stuff too?
Yeah, I mean, I go back, but my North Star for when I'm planning a game and who it's for is me and my players. I'm not thinking about an audience at all, to be perfectly honest. Everything I do DMing wise is to make these girls laugh, to make them mad so that they will do stuff.
Excellent.
I am trying to manipulate these 4 people who I know very well. And also myself have fun. These are things I enjoy. I need to enjoy it too, right? So it's after the fact that I make all those considerations. So yes, music. Music goes under narration. I don't like to hear myself talking for too long without a break. Music goes under combat, almost always.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And music goes under dramatic moments, because I just feel that it helps it helps cue the audience, especially if they're just like iffy on D&D. What's going on? Is it funny music? Is it dramatic music? Is it dangerous music? Like these just little bit of help. And then there's some sound design from time to time when it's appropriate. But unfortunately, because I'm doing it all myself, the sound design is the thing that falls off of the production schedule because I just don't have time.
I was gonna say, I know what kind of timelines you're working with on stuff like that and how long that stuff really takes. And yeah, it's a huge job, especially you lived it once and you thought about it a lot before you did it. And now you're gonna live it again and you're gonna scrub through it and take little chunks and sections and listen to those over and over. Man, it can be a slog if you're doing all three jobs. So good on you. That's super impressive. And I know what it's kind of like to undertake all those assignments. It's huge amount of work.
Do you also cut your own show?
Yeah. Well, so I had a great group and we didn't have to make a lot of cuts. And that was the key because I was working a lot of hours at a full-time job that demanded 6 days a week from me. So it's basically like stay up late and get this out. So I was doing a lot of music for combat because it needed it. Like 5th edition combat, it can really drag. And I knew that was going to be the weak point in I'm not going to have time to scrub combat and get it cinched up clean without all the breaks in between. So I'll make some kick-ass music. So while people are thinking of what they're going to do, they'll have something cool in the background. And the group we had, they're pretty quick with it. It's like, okay, think about what you're going to do before you do it. Just know we got to get through combat as quick as possible. And honestly, we put ourselves in the box of like a 3-hour time limit. We're going to do this game in 3 hours and we're either going to do it or we're not. So we better do it. And that helped us get through things quickly when you set that timer with.
It's huge. It's huge. I wouldn't trade my players or my group for the world because the chemistry is there. But this now that we're in production for season 2, we are better players and it shows in the edit. Like it definitely saves me so much more time. So much more time. You can produce a performance, right?
Yes, exactly.
But it's so much easier when the performance is already there. And we're getting better every day.
That's the key for me and my group. Whenever I would, try to pep talk people to help me out in post-production beforehand, I'd be like, hey guys, if we just get it right, like if we just do it really good the first time, like it's all good. And man, bless my friends and players. Shout out to Jake and Josh Freeland because those guys, Will's driving the show, but he knows what I know. He knows that we've got to get through this quickly and do it right, and that we were just kind of blessed to have a group that was able to perform at that level, and really that was the only way the show was getting out. So I'm glad to hear that you're what it's all about for sure.
So you're not running the campaign and cutting it. You're cutting it, but Will's running it.
Yeah. So that campaign finished. So we're it took about 2 years to do. It was a huge campaign. We took a big break for COVID. Things were hard. We were recording in person because we thought the chemistry would be better.
It is.
And we had the setup, and then we're like, oh, okay, I think we're gonna have to figure out how to switch over to online game. And honestly, once we kind of spent a story arc sort of getting it under our belt, and then we did, and it by the end it felt like we were in the room together again. We kind of figured out the lag a little bit, that sort of thing. The overspeak.
Incredible.
Yeah. So
it's so much better in person.
It really is. There's I know it's hard. It's not possible for everybody to do that. It's probably more likely for everybody to play online these days, even for home games. But you make the best of it. The cool thing about recording remotely is you get all those isolated tracks, so you can kind of do a little bit more cleanup.
True.
Yeah.
But then you're dependent on the quality of mics that each person has sets up in their home.
Yep.
And it's a whole different set of challenges.
Yeah, the balancing ball game changes for sure. Because when you're getting all your mics in a room is critical. For those of you that are ambitious trying to start a D&D podcast, here are the pain points. You have some choices to make.
Mm-hmm.
So does your recording process affect the way you would play a normal game? It sounds, I know we kind of double dipped on this one and talked about it a little bit already, but what do you think?
Wait, what's the question?
Oh, sorry. Does your recording process affect the way you would play a normal session, like unmiked, so to speak?
Oh, got you.
Yeah.
Well, I do definitely appreciate the these separate mics. Yes, that is true.
Mm-hmm.
But another fun Ryan Keeley fact is that she is completely feral. She cannot sit in front of a computer for an extended amount of time. And all of season 1 has been a struggle of trying to bring her quality up to where everybody else is while she's on like telemarketer headsets or whatever it is that can like let her tether be a little bit longer so she can get up and do stuff. And finally, and this is a legit recommendation because it has changed my life, the Rode Pod mic, which is a wireless microphone.
Ooh.
It records 32-bit audio,
Okay.
meaning that it is very difficult to clip
Yeah.
when you get loud and yell, as Ryan does. And it's been a game changer for
Wow.
the quality of the cuts. So if you're looking for a good wireless microphone for anything really, but podcasting for this, it's been just like wonderful. Yeah, Rode Pod mic's fantastic.
Dang, yeah, I really like. We used to record on NT1As before we switched over to the Shure, you know, the common standard these days. But yeah, the Rode. I'm a big believer in Rode. They make great stuff, so I'm not surprised to hear that. Man, 32-bit, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, what does post-production look like for your group? I mean, we talked about music and stuff for dramatic events, but what else are you doing to sort of help it out?
Do you want to know about season 1 or season 2, which is actually on video?
Ooh, that you know, which one do you think I would enjoy to hear more?
I'll surprise you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about video because it's more involved.
Sure.
And probably a little bit more streamlined. So when we record video, we all hop on Riverside, but we're all also making local recordings on our systems. I just recently got everyone to do that.
Okay.
Another great thing to do, because as much as Riverside does high quality recording, you'll still lose a lot. You'll lose a high end of your frequency range.
Right.
It'll still feel a little bit of that phone, a little bit of that crunch quality. It's not full range.
Yeah, they're
full bandwidth
compressing
audio.
a lot on their end. It's interesting.
They are, and respect to them, because this is an incredible tool and it's way better than Zoom.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's
Zoom is compared to Riverside, man. It's like Zoom's like a dinosaur.
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it was never made for recording anyway. It was
Fair.
never made for podcasting. But the local records, which you can just open GarageBand if you're on a Mac, has been, it just like takes it that extra 10%. So we record, everyone sends me their local recordings, and then the next day I sync those up. And then I just go through, and it's kind of a pleasure to it's kind of a producing pass. Like I go through, I watch it, and I just start lifting out the things that really, really don't need to be there. And then I pass it to editors, actually. After season 1,
Oh, cool.
I had 3 friends who are actual picture editors essentially volunteer
Wow.
to help, which is
Nice.
wild. I cannot express my gratitude to these people. They are doing stellar work for essentially revenue share, which at the moment is, not allowed or new.
Right.
So, not only are they investing their time, they're literally investing their time because they are dependent on how well the project does for their own compensation. So I pass it to them, and they do the cut, and then they send it back to me, and then either I'll do the mix, or I'm trying to find others who have bandwidth and the ability, the skill to do the mix. I'm a bit of a, I'm accustomed to dialogue editing for movies. So it's definitely a different beast than podcasts. And I think a lot of editors are very accustomed to kind of slamming stuff together and taking out the breaths and off you go. And I do appreciate when I find someone who can bring a little more finesse to it. I think it brings out the emotions and doesn't like slam too fast. So, but that's the fiction genre. It's different from the interview genre.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, I'll do that. I'll add music as much as I can. We love Soundstripe. That's where I source all of my score.
Cool.
Yeah. And then I'll probably listen back to it about 40 more times and make notes and change it again.
Yeah, that's the life of the editor.
It really is.
Listen to it over and over again. Well, that's all the questions I had for you today. I'm super interested in getting to do a deep dive listen into the show, as I just like kind of skim the surface and prep for this. But it's next in my queue, and I can't wait. There aren't enough all-girl groups out there, definitely not. So I'm glad to see it. And yeah, is there anything? Did you have any questions for us, or anything else you wanted to talk about before we close it out?
Oh my gosh, I was curious actually. For both of you as DMs, I would love to know a little bit about your process when it comes to preparing games.
Yeah. Will, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
It depends on the game. I think there's a difference for me when it comes to preparing a game that's meant for an audience versus one that's just more casual. But Unhallowed is the project that I've been working the most on this last year and a half. It hasn't aired yet. It's a gothic horror, dark fantasy take on D&D. And I mean, I generally like to hole up in a dark room with some headphones and just break out the pencil and paper and start writing down like a point by point of the major plot for the next 2 to 6 hours worth of gameplay, and then start trying to fill in the blank spaces in between. And luckily, Brian said this already, but when you know your players and you trust your players and you've been playing with them for a long time, you kind of just know they're going to fill in a lot of that space for you. So you have to have like a light touch. Like, don't be too heavy-handed, because you got to give them room to breathe, to act, to be. And they are going to help your world feel more real than you ever could on your own. But that's like just the basics. Like, there's more to it than that, obviously. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel that the temptation to over-prepare is something that really I was tight in the grips of when we first started. And
yeah, totally. You've been DMing for how long now?
2-3 years.
Yeah, so yeah, you're breaking out of that stage. In my early DM tenure, over-preparing was the name of the game, and I learned over time it was just not necessary. I didn't have to, and it took a lot of stress off me and ended up making the games better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like
you, Brian?
Yeah, you get that confidence that kind of allows you to do that. You know, when you're prepping in the early days, you know, I'm guilty of it for sure. Like, over prep to high heaven. And my one shot that I played at Will's table, he let me DM for his game for a little bit just to give it a shot. It turned into 3 games. I'm like, wow, I wrote way too much stuff. It was fun, but you know,
it was fun.
Holy smokes, it was crazy. You know, with FBATS, that was my first real like campaign I tried to do, and you know, like I said, it was modules, so everything's prepared for me. I just have to do it really played to my strengths in that campaign to you know, when there was a deviation, we're going to improv, and that's probably where I shine the most, is just kind of coming up with stuff. So these days for home games, I am just sort of writing down some bullet points. And
that is definitely your style, but it works well when Brian does it, for sure.
Yeah, I've got like, I'm like, okay, we're gonna play for like 5 hours tonight, with a food break and probably chit chat in between. So I'm gonna write down the first major event that happens, the second major event. So pretty much I took the idea of putting in like game clocks, that things are going to happen no matter what my players do at certain points, and they're meant to just cause a lot of chaos. I'm not really sure how my players are going to respond to it, but I never, ever, ever give my players enough credit to solve problems. And so these days I'm just like, I don't know how they're going to get out of this, so they'll figure something out. Yeah, I'm always just really excited to figure out to see how they're going to figure it out, because I don't know what I'm going to do. And I kind of just have a fail safe in place. Like, if enough time goes by, this other thing will happen, and then they'll have to deal with that. and maybe, let's
You got
say
the Deus Ex Machina just waiting in the wings.
kinda like it's almost
Yeah.
like, okay, there's a dragon. I wonder how they're gonna get out of this one. And it's like, okay, well, if they don't figure it out, Dragon 2 is gonna show up, and I really don't know what's gonna happen when that goes down. So that's the style these days for home games. I have aspirations to do an original score of all acoustic music to a campaign that is a little more on the rails than that, with a little more prep and a lot more lore in a world that I built myself. So that's the goal down the line. So I'd love to do that one day. The approach to that one is going to be like very post-production heavy with like, I have a speech I want to do, and I'm going to like basically have the sound file ready to play for my players when we get to that point. And, I have a point A and a point B, and whatever happens in the middle is fine with me, as long as we get to point B. And I've kind of shown for myself that I can make it there somehow. We'll loop back around to it somehow. So it's a very, lean into the journey. I think the journey is the most fun for books and D&D and movies. So, that's my style.
Do you guys have, do you have like an all-time favorite time you got a reaction out of your players?
I got one off the top of my head if you don't, Brian.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna try and be as spoiler free as I can, because this is pretty far into the campaign for Super Quest Saga. But I had been preparing from day one a very dramatic moment that I wanted to elicit an emotional response, not just from the players but from the audience too. And we finally made it after a long time of the campaign. We finally made it to that moment, and I remember working so hard on some dialogue that I got a little teary-eyed. So it was incredibly rewarding when we were playing it in real time and I was seeing the reactions on everyone's face. I remember particularly Jake, who it was over the screen, so I wasn't in person with him, but it definitely looked like the tears were welling up for just a split second, and like I was like, yes, I'm nailing this scene, and it is happening.
Yes,
so
my friends are crying. I'm doing it right.
Right, exactly. So that's the one that pops up at the top of my head immediately.
Wow.
For me, it's been my home game lately that has elicited the most visceral responses for so far. I mean, FBAT's had a lot of great stuff. Oh my gosh, it's got so many one-liners. It's got stuff I clipped and put as like ringtones for my phone because it just made me laugh every time I heard it. And that's just like a purely like, there's a lot of fantasy, adventure, high-tech stuff going on, high-flying superhero stuff, but it's mostly in root. The way I look at that game is it's an improv comedy game at its core, with like you wrap that around Batman like Philo Dough or something, I don't know, and like, that's what you get. But my home game's been so funny because of this these chaotic clock timers that go off and then stuff happens. My players are like, what the hell is going on? Like now this? And Will's been a part of the two of the games now, so just seeing people being like, dude, what the hell? Like now, like, what are we going to do? I'm like, yeah, what are you going to do? I want to know.
From a player standpoint, it is very much the second we're like, okay, we have the situation under control. So long as nothing else goes wrong, suddenly there's an explosion and everything else has gone wrong. And we're like, what do we do?
I love it.
There's a great campaign by Friends at the Table. They played a game of Blades in the Dark. It's just a wonderful campaign, and their DM does this clock system, and things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. I'm like, wow, like how much worse can it get? Like, how can it get it? Like, at least it's not raining, and then it will inevitably rain. It's just like that, and I like that a lot. And I was just like, what if I just kind of leaned off the gas a little bit for it though? And that's the style that gets a lot of great responses, and I am super excited every time somebody's freaking out at the table. They're trying to figure out, like, am I going to live? What am I going to do about this? They're like pouring through their character sheet. Those are my favorite reactions.
And you haven't built in the solution for them, so good luck.
Yep, it's true. I have, like, things will just keep happening, and we'll figure it out. I'm not afraid to kill people anymore in D&D.
Were you?
Yeah, I accidentally took down a buddy of mine.
Was it Jake? It was Jake, wasn't it?
No, it was Freeland.
Oh.
Yeah, we took him down. We were trying to record a campaign that never really made it to the ground floor, and so people had more plot armor than normal because I didn't want to make character switches when you're doing an actual play. It's kind of hard. Will and I walked the tightrope with that. I think it's got pluses and minuses for sure. But yeah, I took him down, and it was kind of a bummer because I just sort of, as a new DM, I sort of overplotted my combat. I didn't think they were going to go to this area. They do. My monsters are a bit too strong. One of my players gets like one shot and doesn't make it out. And it's like, he failed all his death saves. And now nobody can go get him because everything is too strong in this area. So he just sort of dies. I'm like, that's
rough.
That was a bummer one. Big newbie error. It's, big learning experience for me.
Yeah, that's one thing that I do appreciate about playing a published campaign as well, is as a relatively new DM to you both, I'm not so good at balancing combat at the moment, right? So to be able to have a few pre-built encounters, or at least something that I can reskin to fit my needs, has been very, very useful in helping me feel heartened enough to dive into the hobby without being turned off by the absolute pile of numbers and stats that you seemingly have to keep in your head.
Yeah. A great rule that I have learned to implement when I'm balancing my combat encounters is I look at my weakest player in terms of AC and HP, whoever that might be. It might be two players that fill that niche. So one has low HP, one has low HC. I'd basically say, how many successful rolls does it take to kill this character? Not crits, but, if it's like 4 or 5, that's probably a good rule of thumb, depending on what you're looking for from that encounter.
Sure. That makes sense. That's a really good rule of thumb. I'm going to use that.
Yeah. If you want it shorter, bring that number down. Longer, take that number up. That's usually a good way. I look at a monster like, okay, if this thing hit my weak guy a bunch of times somehow, how would that go? Not great. Okay, we'll kind of introduce a situation to help the balance. Maybe it's terrain, maybe it's less monster, it just depends.
Yeah. Wasn't this game started as like a strategy game, like war, like the tables with the terrain and the little soldiers representing armies and stuff? Wasn't that how D&D started?
It was a war game called Chainmail, yeah. Yep.
Okay. So it would make sense that would be the more important, the more focused part of the game. I think it's so interesting that has almost started to take a back seat to the storytelling element.
I agree.
Definitely.
I think actual plays are a big reason for that because we are story driven.
Did it change for you? Like, as people who played before actual play podcasts became popular, were you more tactical?
I guess that's for Will and not for me, because I'm born in this world of actual play podcasts. I don't have much experience outside of it.
Steeped in the sauce.
Yeah.
I think as a dungeon master, I've always leaned way more towards the narrative. That's just the fantasy lit fan in me. But my first 7 years of playing the game, I was mostly a player, and when you're a player, you have a lot less control over what's going on in the game, and this was previous to any of the live plays or the popularization of 5e, so it was just more commonplace for, whatever the DM says goes, and you don't really got to say. So in those games, I would lean more tactical, more combat-oriented, because I have no control over the quality of story or how much story there's going to be. But when it came to my games, I was always leaning pretty heavy on the story, and then 5e made that easier in general, and then for me, the first live plays that I got into were the Acquisitions Incorporated with Jerry Holkins and Mike Krahulik and squad.
Those are great.
Those are much more comedy than story, but it made it click for me that we could take these stories that we were telling and turn them into a medium that we could show other people, and that kind of changed the trajectory of my life.
Wow, that's really cool. Do you feel like combat has gotten worse then, since we've stopped focusing on the tactics?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit to be candid. And I think an experienced DM can make it spicier. I think me and Brian have gotten really good at making it spicier. Although I agree with the sentiment that some DMs feel like it shouldn't be on them to do that, and that they're not wrong in feeling that way. But it can be fixed. I am curious to see what happens as we move over to this revised version of 5e 5.5, if you will, because they definitely are leaning more in the tactical direction. But we are taking the biggest D&D audience there has ever been in history, and we are now shifting the style of combat away from the more simplistic way we've been doing it the last 10 years. So I'm curious to see how the audience of Dungeons and Dragons reacts to that as well.
That's really interesting. I've checked out almost nothing about 5.5, actually, other than what I've heard on your show.
Right.
So I don't know anything about how the combat model has evolved.
Yeah, I'm actually, the more I look at it, the more I'm like, I don't know. Like, I like the tactical angle on it, but I don't know how this is going to play on microphone compared to 5e standard. And I wonder if that's going to have an impact on the success of the new edition or not.
I think with actual play being what it is these days, it was probably at least considered.
Right.
I have some faith in what that's going to be. Jess, do you guys have plans to transition to 5.5, or do you think you'll stick it out with the 5e stuff that you've got going on?
I am so new to all of it that I think it would probably be an easy enough transition.
That's true.
I have been kind of interested in some of the class updates. It might be something that if we ever, perhaps after this season, decide to roll up new characters, that might be the transition to give it a try. But I'm absolutely open to it.
I've been hearing that's the big hang up for a lot of people is the characters are built in 5th edition rule set. Yeah. And so new characters, easier transition. Old characters, you kind of got to reformat. That could change some of the information that the character brings to the table. And that has to do with backstory and all that stuff. So yeah, it's definitely another tightrope to consider in the future. But I'm glad you're open to it.
How would it change? I'm totally open to it. How would it change the backstories?
Yeah, well, when I build characters, I kind of put together, especially with spellcasters, reasons in world why I would know some of those things, those tool proficiencies and spells. And with some of that stuff changing, it might take an element away that might be important to my character. I might have to readapt something that I wrote out specifically for this one spell, or for this, my mom taught me this spell is like a low-hanging fruit version of that. Or like my dad taught me calligraphy. Yeah,
you're basically coming up with like in-world reasons that the mechanics work the way they do. Yes. So when the mechanics change, it could force you into a position where you have to tweak the narrative.
It could. I'm not saying, I haven't looked at it deep enough to do that. I'm not currently a player in a 5th edition game, so it's not really like, I've asked some people I'm playing with, like, are you guys interested in that? If it happens, like, would you care? And then some people are like, well, they didn't do the thing I'm doing in 5.5 yet. I'm like, oh yeah, well that's important. So that'll be a no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's like, what did you use? Theater style non-initiative combat. That feels like it's totally the opposite. It's just a plain storytelling combat that I might actually steal. I don't know if it's yours, but
we do that for FBATs for sure. Or I'm like, okay, it's just like, it's a mob of people, and Batman goes in and tears up like 6 dudes. So you two guys are going to go in and do the same thing. So we basically use minions from 4th edition. You get hit, you're down, that kind of thing. Yeah. So that's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it for a speedy, flavorful combat. This combat is supposed to show how your players kick ass. That's a good one. That's a good one to use.
Yeah.
All right, Jess. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I love the two-way conversation we got to have. It was really insightful talking to you. And where can everybody find Seduce the Dragon, or anything else you'd like to plug?
Oh, yeah. You can find I Seduce the Dragon anywhere you get podcasts. we are going to be starting a season 2 on video with faces later this year. Fall, we hope, maybe winter, depending on how long the production process takes.
Cool.
But in the meantime, we're dropping kind of some bonus episodes. We just did a crossover with the podcast Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh yeah, we know those guys.
So we're doing I DM'd a 2-part crossover. We traded players, half our players for half of their players.
Oh, cool.
And I don't think it's a spoiler at this point to mention that it's a horror one-shot featuring the Dirt Man.
Oh yes, I love the Dirt Man has taken hold of the D&D community.
It's America's favorite new cryptid.
Oh well, the Hat Man is next. The Hat Man's making a comeback.
Oh, I have not checked out the Hat Man.
That's when you take too much Benadryl. Apparently, that's what I'm told.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
So look for us, I Seduce The Dragon, and anywhere you get podcasts, ISTD Pod on all socials. Where you can find we actually keep a pretty active TikTok if you're not ready to listen to a whole podcast.
Oh, nice.
We've got little snippets. Yeah, so you can just dip into the little funny moments.
Sweet.
And
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. We really appreciate your time and you coming on the show. I hope to talk to you again.
Yeah, great to talk to you guys.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you again.
The Dungeoncast.